The court system is in crisis, you know, I make no bones about saying that.
20-something years later, we're still really good friends. All his family are my family. His mum is, you know, I'm closer to her than I am to my own mum, you know.
If you do need to go to court, how enforceable are those in reality?
That's a big question, Susie. That's a big question.
When you have a sensation here, and it's an emotional connection, your right brain goes like that and it can have an imagination as to what could happen. If we can get to what that fear feels like and it's acknowledged, then everything changes.
That's basically both of you walking into a room with a suitcase containing 50 grand each and throwing it on the fire. You know, all you've done is made a few professionals a little bit richer.
I myself have been through a divorce, which was very, very traumatic for me. My children were very, very little. But we managed to work out a way to do things in the best way possible. And, you know, 20-something years later, we're still really good friends. All his family are my family. His mum is, you know, I'm closer to her than I am to my own mum, you know. So we managed to do it. It was very difficult, but we did manage to get through that. And for me, it's very important when you're splitting up. It's very important to look at nutrition and making sure that everybody's eating healthily, because it's often a time when everyone's very distressed, and so the first thing you stop doing is cooking properly.
Because usually, or very frequently anyway, there's a partner in the marriage who is really good at the paperwork and admin, and there's the other one who leaves it all to the other one who's just left, and they're in a quandary as to how to work with their situation. But also the other thing is that sometimes people are completely poleaxed by their own situation, even though they might be fantastically good at admin and paperwork at work, but they can't deal with their own private stuff. So what I can do is help them provide a safe space and actually just sort of focus and concentrate and actually really get on with collating and form filling and getting all the information together, so that when you go to the solicitor eventually, or whoever you need to actually go to, you've got all that information already pre-arranged and collated, so that you make the best use of the expensive professional's time.
We love collaborative.
Yeah, I love collaborative. It is a much more positive, more optimistic way to do the job that I do. And the reality with being a family lawyer is, you know, sometimes I do have to put my court hat on, because that is the only way to get an outcome sorted out. But hopefully, what I aim to do is really try other things first. Traditionally, you know, you perhaps would have gone and seen your high street lawyer, and they would have gone, okay, let's issue proceedings, let's go to court. There wouldn't have even been a discussion around, shall we do mediation, shall we do collaborative, what about arbitration? And now we have that whole kind of toolkit of things which might be appropriate and might work and might help. So we have to look at all those options, really. And the way collaborative works, for those of you who don't know, is that you instruct a lawyer who is not just a solicitor, but also specifically collaborative trained. We have a really intensive 3-day course and then follow-up training to be collaboratively trained. So you would both instruct a lawyer who has had that training, and then rather than sort of letters going backwards and forwards and, you know, months with nothing really happening, all the work is done in a 4-way meeting. So both lawyers, both of you sit in a room and we talk about the issues and we try and get things resolved, which can be a lot quicker and a lot more cost effective. So that's how it works. But to support that process, we will quite often invite a family consultant who will be, you know, neutral, but may do work with the parties outside of the process if that's going to help them. We can also have, you know, people like Gary, a financial planner, come into the meeting and talk to everybody about, well, this is a great idea, but is it actually going to work in process, you know, in practice? How's it going to look in 5 years? How's it going to look in 10 years? When the pensions kick in, is that all going to work financially? Everyone works together. It's very much a team effort to get things resolved.
It just sounds so sensible.
Yeah. It does sound so sensible.
But Gary why do you think that so few people have heard of financial planners when creating a plan would seem one of the first most important steps?
You've got people who are receptive to collaborative law and they don't even know collaborative law exists, and I would say financial planning is behind that. I think one of the things that's quite essential is that if you're going through that sort of situation, you need to have a position of what you need in terms of income or expenditure worked out for what you need first. So needs have to be the first aspect. What tends to happen is what people want, and that's much more expensive. And I think a lot of the stuff that we tend to want to try and do is, if we're going to mediate stuff, you want to get to the position relatively quickly. If you've got the old-fashioned cake, you can only cut it in half. And what tends to happen is you'll have £3,000 of household income, and one side wants £1,750 and the other one wants £1,750, and we're £500 short, and we can never get to that equation. So I try and get people to the need section first, and then if we've got any capacity on top of that, we move from there. And also not to make any rash decisions. When this is going forward, you need an element of time for the dust to settle or things to happen. So you know where you're going to go, what you're going to do, think about if you're going to have to move out the property, what you're going to have to buy on the other side, and all those things have a financial consequence. You know, you may need to be 5 minutes, if there's children involved, 5 minutes from the children, or 10 minutes from the children, and all these things have a knock-on effect because you've got travel time, school costs, all sorts of things that you can put into a plan and work out.
It's important for people to get at the very least advice about pensions, because the way they interpret it is often completely inaccurate.
It can be a bit skewed.
Well, it's also one of those things that people focus very much on what they need today.
Yes.
Because you've got to sort out today first, obviously. So quite often what particularly the parties in a weaker financial position will say is, you know, I don't care about pension, I want the extra 100,000 because I want to get a nicer house and a better house near the school and for the children, whatever.
Which is
or
wants,
any house,
which
yeah.
is wants rather than
which
needs
is
again.
great, but yeah, we have what we will work, you know, with someone like Gary to do is make sure that, okay, fine, that resolves the problem today, but what is your position going to look like in, you know, depending on your age, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And obviously if you're in your 30s, that's fine, but if you're in your 50s, 60s, we need to be much more cautious about how we're dividing those assets and making sure that you're not just panicking and accepting a deal because you want to get it done and you want to get the deal and you want to move forward, but it's actually not going to work for you in the future, because that's when you'll come back and say, why did you let me do this? What's all gone wrong?
And also, I was wondering that when there's a psychological pull between the parents, they need some rational thinking, and they need to hear some practical things of actually that they can't play games with each other's emotions.
No, in using the
some
money
reality
as
checks,
a tool.
some reality testing, and actually how does this affect not only the inequality sometimes of one earner versus the other.
Yes. And that then also has an impact, as Verity was saying, in terms of the age of the children, because that dynamic changes probably every 5 years when they're 5 or 10 or 15, but it's still relevant in a different way.
Yeah.
And that could also help you get them to take the emotion out of it, because quite often that's where initially we'll meet with the client and the emotion will be, well, he or she doesn't deserve anything. Why should they have a nice house? I don't care where they live. And actually, as I think your film mentioned, you know, they do care really, because they don't want their child going to visit dad in a caravan. You know, they would like dad to have a suitable house.
You're not going to see the child.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And that's all emotion driven. And you have to really try really hard to strip that out and look at facts and finances, and someone like Gary can do that and go, actually, well, how's this going to work in real life? Let's reality test this and not look at who deserves what. Because I think one of the things that I hear, you know, day in, day out is don't see a lawyer because they're scary. I don't think they are. They're scary, they will force you to argue. I promise we don't. And not a good one anyway, and they're really expensive. That's basically what people think about family lawyers particularly. And you know, from my experience, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, actually it's really cheap. Of course it's not cheap, but when you're dealing with your family's future, cheap isn't necessarily what you really want. You want value for money, and actually if you can do the process and do work around the process and use the right professionals, you can make it as cost effective
not
as if you get into a situation where you're in a court process for financial matters and it's contested and it goes all the way through and we spend 18 months and there's 2 lawyers and you are easily looking at 25, you're probably looking closer to 50, and especially if people have well experienced barristers and stuff getting involved, that's basically both of you walking into a room with a suitcase containing 50 grand each and throwing it on the fire. All you've done is made a few professionals a little bit richer. Nobody we don't want to see that. That doesn't fill me with joy about my chosen career. What I want to see is you spending your money wisely and getting bits of help. The simplest example I can think of is someone like Andrea. If I get a client who comes into me wanting to do their financial disclosure and they bring with them 3 carrier bags with documents in no particular order, unsorted, and I've then got to spend the next day desperately trying to sort it all out, that's not a legal job, but that's still, I've got to charge them for doing that because I'm doing that work. Whereas you could get Andrea to come to your house, sort that all out for you, and then present it to me pretty much done, and I've got to spend much less time looking at it.
And
so it's just about investing in the right ways.
And to give you some sort of context on that, probably I would charge you for a day what many a solicitor would charge for an hour, and that's frightening. And also the other thing is that if I did come in and do that help with you, not only would it make you feel more in control and you would know that you were coming to the meeting with your solicitor with the information that you actually needed and there weren't glaring holes that meant that you had to go away and then come back again and book a time again and all that sort of thing.
Mediation often does the job fine for a lot of people and can be very low cost, and so it's a very good place to start.
And you have to have in mind if you're going to go to court first.
Yeah, and
Is it-
I mean, we're assuming that they decide you want to avoid court, so you're looking at your dispute. Yes, so
Unless you've tried and they've refused, and
Yeah.
then you go.
So with collaborative law, I always liken it to I had all my children at home. I love the home births, but some people want to be in hospital with the white coats, so they feel more secure. And some people feel more secure with a lawyer by their side. Or if it's very, very complex finances and they want to have financial independence in there, there's a lot of reasons why the collaborative can also be a very good option for people. They should certainly look into it. It will obviously tend to cost more initially because you're not just got one mediator, you've got 2 collaborative lawyers. But ultimately, if it's going to keep you out of court, it's still going to be many, many thousands of pounds cheaper.
Most collaboratives are something like, I think the average is about 3 to 5 meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think, yes, you are paying 2 lawyers for 3 to 5 meetings, which could be, an hour to maybe 3 hours a meeting.
Yeah.
So that's, a fair amount of money. But actually, if you think about what you're
The
saving in the
progress,
cost of a court process,
Yeah.
and or letters going backwards and forwards months and months on end.
And time as well, because
The meetings can very much be done on your time scale. So if you aren't ready, and that kind of ties back into your question where if it's not quite emotionally, people aren't ready, you might have that first meeting and then both go away and do some work and get ready.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are ready and you just want to bash it out and get these issues sorted, subject to everyone's availability, the meetings can be done quite quickly, so you're not waiting around for a court process. Arbitration comes in more if you haven't been able to reach an agreement and you need a third party to step in and go, that is the decision. You are no longer able to make a decision, that is the decision.
And sometimes you can actually have that just on a single issue.
Yes.
can't you? So rather than it dealing with the whole agreement, it will just be there's one sticking point that you just can't get to the end of, and at that point you just literally appoint the arbitrator for that point.
So instead of it all unravelling and then you're going to court and the judge isn't necessarily interested in all the things you did agree on, it's like you start all over again. So with an arbitrator and you choose them again, it can be just a few £100. It doesn't have to be massively expensive, and they're specialist in their area, which you don't know that the judge in the court is actually a specialist in that area.
The court system is in crisis, I make no bones about saying that. That it is vastly underfunded and they're riddled with delays, and frequently we will go to court ready for a hearing and find that there's no judge available,
Clark.
they run out of time, whatever happened, the judge hasn't had time to even look at the papers, let alone understand the issues. And that's devastating emotionally and devastating financially. So if you can be, at least you're in control of the process. A lot of the reason for that is that basically the starting point and end point seems to be, oh well, we have to pay an arbitrator, we don't have to pay a judge. And that almost is like people go, oh, I don't have to pay an arbitrator, and that seems to be enough. You have to look at it in the round, you have to look at all the benefits, and to me, from my professional perspective, arbitration is a no-brainer.
Yeah. And even in mediation,
it's so helpful.
Instead of getting one stuck on one point, you can have the arbitration, they make a decision, you abide by it, and then you can carry on with mediation. If you do need to go to court for a contact order or for a financial order, how enforceable are those in reality?
That's a big question, Susie. That's a big question. Financially, financial orders are pretty enforceable. So it depends what you're trying to enforce. But for example, if you've got an order where there's a sale of a property or something like that, those are really enforceable, because essentially at the end of the day you can go to the court and you can get a judge to sign a contract to sell that property if you absolutely need to. If the other person's been given the opportunity, there's an order and they're not complying with it, we can make them comply. Obviously, worst case scenario, you can have contempt of court, you can end up with somebody being imprisoned if they won't comply with things like disclosure orders, that kind of thing. So there are children orders are more difficult in terms of enforceability. There are provisions for enforceability built into the system. Query is how effective are they, and the difficulty is often that, for example, if you've got, often it's mum who's the primary carer who children live with, she's not complying with the order, she's not allowing dad to see. It's not necessarily cut and dry. She won't just say, well, I'm not complying. She might do. But most mums will say, I'm not complying because the child's very distressed, she doesn't want to go, he doesn't want to go, he doesn't like it, he got injured last time he was there. So there's always a lot of background, and unless it's a very clear-cut case, it's very difficult then for the judge to say, right, enforcement. But there are enforcement options, so but they take time. It can be, if you've got a very difficult person on the other side, it can be a very difficult journey and a very long journey, but you do have to just keep kind of plodding along down the road, and you will get there eventually.
Eventually, but it is just about expectations. Could you just share the story you were giving us earlier about a couple who've been spending a year fighting over children?
Well, and strangely, the mother wasn't denying any contact. What she was doing was not complying with any specific regularity. So when they were getting on, it was endless pot, but when they weren't getting on, it was nothing. So Dad wanted to put a minimum child contact arrangement in place, and when she was in a good mood, yes, she was agreeing to that. But then when it all fell apart, it was no, we go back to court. So it was kind of going this way and this way. So mediation was suggested so that they could talk about what that might be like for the child. And that took a year to get both parties to the table, and 3 hours the consent order is going through, and it's going through, the child contact arrangements is going through so that there's a minimum, and that's what was discussed. This isn't about, you're seeing the child more than this, actually every month when you're talking, but when you're not talking, this is going to be the minimum, so that the child can get an arrangement. So actually it's complex. And so when you've got a relationship that's often on, lots of families do get on, but then don't. A new partner comes into play, and contact seems to just disappear, when actually you've had a relationship for 6 years with your child, and suddenly a new partner comes in and you've got nothing. What do you do?
And how
do you see your child again?
How much have they spent prior to sitting down?
£1 million.
Yeah. And I think one of the key things with these is from the outside, is that with any form of dispute resolution, you've cut a deal. Like, I'm working with a financial planner, you've had to communicate with the help of the professionals there. So that's an ongoing thing. So when you do have a bad time again, you've you know that if you go back and work with those people, you've got something that has worked in the past, as opposed to couples that have just used court, where it is, then they just think they have to go back again.
It's the same with everything. The finances, the maintenance monies. If people can get to the point of what the maintenance is for, and actually it's all understood about why they're doing everything, it's much easier to come to a resolution. If it's about the other person has asked for this and I don't think they deserve it, then you're going to fight forever. If one person says something unpleasant, the other one will defend and attack, and then it just carries on. Or it's perceived as an attack, perceived as a defence. It's never good. Somebody needs to break it first, and it's really hard because pride gets in the way or hurt gets in the way. And usually, I think I'm right in saying that every single client that I've ever seen, at the bottom of it is hurt and fear. And if we can get to what that fear feels like, and it's acknowledged, then everything changes. The whole mindset changes. If you can see something in the other person that you're both in fear or you're both hurt, something you both kind of go, do you know what, we're sorry over it. But it takes that. It takes the ability to see it. And our left brain works completely different to our right brain, and our left brain is that brain that calculates stuff and says it's binary, it says yes and no, it says it's black or it's white, and you don't get any resolution using your left brain as such. When you have a sensation here, and it's an emotional connection, your right brain goes like that and it can have an imagination as to what could happen. So we're always trying to find something there that ignites this side that says it's possible.
One of the real benefits of the collaborative process, because we find that it's amazing how I was in a meeting the other day, and the wife genuinely didn't understand the plan behind the pension provision that the husband had set in place. He's self-employed, so he'd got some quite sort of sensible tax advice about putting large amounts of money into pension, blah, 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 blah. She didn't really understand where that had all come from. So she asked him that question, and he explained, oh, well, I took this tax advice, and because of what we were earning, da-da-da-da-da-da. And she said, great, that's really helpful, thanks very much. That conversation took about 5 minutes. Trust was, not restored, but trust was restored. She now understands, she can move forward and have a sensible conversation about pension sharing and all of that kind of stuff. That process within correspondence or outside of that collaborative process between solicitors probably would have taken a month, and everybody would have thought some sort of accusation. Because trying to word that, oh, could you just explain? Because a lawyer would read, and potentially the party would read, could you just explain? Oh, well, they think I've done something wrong. They think I'm being untoward. Straight away, you're spiralling into anger, into distrust, and you're making everything worse. But actually, it was just a very honest, genuine, straightforward inquiry. Exactly. So that's why sometimes the collaborative process has that benefit, and the same thing within mediation. You can actually have that conversation, and it clarifies things so much better than a text. Or 5 years of anger, of thinking that they've left me, they've got the life of Riley, they're living it up with a new partner, they don't care, etc., etc. So much hurt from that. 5 years on, they suddenly get into a room, one party in tears, and the guy says, actually, can I explain actually how it was? I was in therapy for a year because I was devastated at that, but I couldn't live for a moment longer with X, Y, and Z, and that's happened. And she kind of melted into a position of, thank you. Because her perception of his experience couldn't be further from his experience of reality and how much money he'd paid in therapy and how hard he's finding it. And you got a job there, but, to suit yourself. He said, I got a job there because I know you needed the money for the children, and I had no options but to take that job. I don't want that job. I hate that job. I was in therapy because of that job. Actually all the sacrifices he'd made because he hadn't seen his children because she was so angry was completely different to how she'd seen him not interested in children, not and that's
it's all about perception. It's all about perception.
And what you've just described there leads beautifully onto the next workshop.